Alrighty, guys. So this is going to be a quick overview of just Unity in general, right? Like we're not going to get into building the game. We're not going to get into building the code. There's just a lot of tips and tricks that make working in Unity a lot easier that you may not have picked up in the time that you're working on. Some of them I didn't know were there until, years in. But we're going to obviously first just start at the beginning. You should try and keep your Unity hub always up to date, you know. Mine isn't currently up to date, unfortunately, so I'm not following my own rules there, but you should try to. That being said, when you're working in Unity, you generally, when you start a project, always want to keep it in the same version of Unity unless there's a reason for you to upgrade, right? Like maybe Unity put out a cool new package for you, and it's only available in Unity 2023.1 or something like that, right? You can see I have a couple different versions installed right now, and that's because when you start in one project, or when you start a project in one version, you generally don't update again, like I said, unless there's something that you want to that you need in a newer version. The reason, because a lot of the time you're going to start getting bugs and things that you don't want to have to deal with. They might change how physics works a little bit. So your jump force in, one version of Unity might work a little bit different in another version of Unity. That's a pretty drastic change and usually not the case, but every now and then you might end up seeing like weird bugs or changes or things that you have, like add-ons that you have installed into Unity, just stop working when you're in a new version. Um, we're going to go ahead and make a new project. I'm not actually going to make it, but I just want to walk through this process. It'll ask you for your editor version up here. For if you're watching this just because you want to get a intro into Unity, no problem. But if you're watching this for my 2023 JTerm 110 class, we're going to be working in 2022.20. If you don't have this installed, please go install it. You should be able to go just over here to your installs, hit install editor, and it should be right there. 2022.2.1 is also fine. Like you can just install that one. Big point being, we want the 2022.2. Okay. I have point 0. I'm probably after these videos today going to install that newer one just because I like every now and then just having the newest, most up-to-date version on my computer. But yeah, if we were to go back to projects and hit new project, we of course are working on 2D games in these classes. So we go to 2D, give it a name, and create it where you want. Make sure you keep note of where you're creating it though, okay? So I already went ahead and made a project, so let me just go pop that open. And this is Unity, right? We've all looked at it. We all know what it is. I'm just going to go through a real quick breakdown of the different parts of it. We have our hierarchy over here. And actually, I'm going to showcase the fact that you can really edit all of this first before I start getting into the windows. You can edit this entire, layout just by dragging these tabs around, okay? I've noticed a lot of people struggling with this, but when you want to work in this program, it's really easy and really useful to drag these tabs around for whatever you're doing in particular. For example, if you're animating, you might have your animation window long ways down at the bottom and your animator up here so you can see it all. When you're playing the game, you might just have your game window up. Or when you're working with specific game objects, you'd obviously want to be able to click on them in your hierarchy, have your scene view, and then maybe just have your inspector over here. So that way then you can get a nice, easy look at it. If you're cleaning your project folder, you might want that at the bottom here. And as you can see, I'm back to where I pretty much was at the start, just by dragging these tabs around. They should auto click in to various parts. You can have them just be a floating window. It's its own window now. You won't be able to see this, but I just dragged it off screen to my other screens. You can do that as well if you have a multi-monitor setup. I'm just going to clean this back up to how I normally have it. Generally, I have my project and console at the bottom, my hierarchy on the left, scene and game window in the middle, and my inspector on the right. Take a sip of my water real quick. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the gist of like the actual layout. Now, if you ever really bork up your layout, you can go to window up here, layouts, and they have a bunch of presets for you, right? So we can go for split, where you can see different. In 2D, this isn't very useful, but um, you can have tall, you can have, there's all kinds of different presets. So if you ever lose things, you can reset it very easily that way. Now, I'm actually going to go back to that for split because you might notice we have 4 scene views. You can add tabs by right clicking on a tab and going to add tab, and these are like those default tabs that Unity just has ready for you. If you like, they're the most used basically, but they're not all of them. So I can add another inspector. So if I click on my camera, we'll see that. Let's drag this inspector down here. It live updates. I'm going to just make a game object real quick so we have more than one thing to click on. It live updates both, right? So you might be asking, like, well, why would I, want to have 2 inspectors or 4 scene windows? Well, the scene windows you can edit independently. So I could, if I was working on a 3D game, look at, I don't know, the Gizmo doesn't seem to want to work. It's interesting. Um, there we go. It was locked. You could have, be looking at different versions of the same scene, right? You could look at the left or the right side, the top side, stuff like that. In 2D, you generally aren't going to be using that too much unless you just want to look at 2 different things. Maybe you, if we zoom out, have your level over here, and it extends all the way up here. You might want to look at both to see what's going on, right? And the way you would go about doing that is going to add tab scene, or going to window general scene. Did it add? Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Hold on a second. Okay, so I think window only adds it if it isn't currently in there. It seems like. If I go window, let's try adding that lighting thing one more time. So if I go rendering, lighting, yep, it just will tab you over to the current one. That's my bad on that. So yeah, if you want to add extras, you would go to the add tab and add them in here. But what I just showed showcases another thing. If I go to that add tab, these are all like the most common windows that you're going to use, right? Your project, your hierarchy, inspector, game, scene, and animation. We're not going to talk on profiler because you guys probably won't be using it too much. But if we go to window, there are all kinds of other windows that we can open up. We have audio mixer, we have sequencing. If you have timeline, we have 2D sprite editor, right? You can see I could keep adding these windows on and on and on, but really you don't need them most of the time. So that's why Unity doesn't have all the windows up at once, right? Um, so yeah, that's kind of it when it comes to that. I'm going to go ahead and reset that. I just wanted you guys to know that there is a way to reset it, how you can drag things around. Um, yeah. So now let's actually get into these base windows that we have here, right? So our hierarchy, if you guys have probably worked in Unity at least a little bit, and it should be pretty easy to tell that our hierarchy, I'm just going to add some actual visual objects in here. It's just a list of the items that are in our scene, right? And a scene is, you could think of like a level. Um, so right now, all I have is a main camera, an empty game object, and this little square sprite. Now, as I'm clicking on these, you'll see that the inspector changes, right? The inspector does what the name is, right? It inspects the current selected game object. This is all cool, fine and dandy. You can see it has, for our camera, it has a camera component, an audio listener, and a transform. Every game object will have some kind of transform. We'll get into that a little bit more, like what I mean by some kind, when we get into our UI talk, because there are more than one kind of transform. But overall, that's what the hierarchy inspector do. They kind of work really well together. Now, taking it a little bit of a step back, sometimes you'll want to edit things. I'm going to just add another inspector real quick to go to another example of like why you might have more than one inspector. So I'm just gonna, let's put it side by side. It'll be easier to look at that way. So let's say that I was working on my camera. Um, a cool thing about the inspector window, and you'll see this with a couple windows as I'm clicking around, is we have this little lock icon. The lock icon basically means in the inspector, it locks onto whatever is currently selected. So as you can see, I now have this locked, and this inspector locked, and this inspector is unlocked. What that essentially means is I can click on this game object, and only the unlocked inspector will update. And you might be asking, well, why would I want to do that? Well, if I click on the square, and let's say I wanted my camera perfectly centered on the square, right? I could say, okay, the square's position is -9 and 3.95. So now I can come in here and say -9 and 3.95, right? It just makes it easier to edit it without having to click back and forth. This is also super useful when you're clicking on things in your assets folder, which we're going to talk, or your project window and the assets folder, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But as you can see, when I click on this, let's just make a new script called my script. You know, when I click on this, my inspector updates. So if I, for example, were to click off of that, let's say I'm working on my camera, right? And I'm like, what do I want to add? What do I want to add? And let's imagine I have a whole bunch of scripts here and they're not named super well, or I have prefabs that I want to go and add to my game object here. Well, if I click on my script, it actually will get rid of the inspector. This is a really annoying thing for a lot of people who are new to Unity. Um, so what I generally do is I'll lock the object I'm working on and then drag my script onto it. And you'll see that this updated too. It updates in real time for both of them. But if I click on this accidentally, well then now I have to go back and click on main camera again and drag the script on. And if I happen to misclick, especially if you're using a touchpad, it gets very frustrating. So yeah, that's the use for locking. So I'm going to go ahead and close this tab because I think we're done with our multi-tab situation here. And let's take a look at our project window. Okay. Project window is basically like your file explorer. Actually, if I right click on assets and go to show and explorer, it'll bring us to our Unity project. You can see I saved 110JTerm, that's the name of my project, to my desktop, and we'll see all kinds of folders here. Your project window is just a peek into your file explorer. That's all it is. And it's specifically looking into your assets folder. So you can see here I have my scenes, I have that script I made. It even gives me a little preview of what's in there. It has some meta files, you really don't have to worry about it. But as I go and I tweak this, let's say, eventually I'm going to need an art folder. I'm just going to duplicate that and make a code folder and a sound folder. And I'm going to drag my script into my code folder because, we got to keep things clean. I'll see that this changes, right? Because all that is an interface to update your file explorer, or if you're on Mac, your Finder. That's all it really is. It's just like a window into that. So yeah, I mean, that's really all that there is. There are some things that if you're using video and whatnot, there are certain special folders you can use that Unity just like has sanctioned off the naming convention. So if you name a certain folder, a certain thing, it works a little bit differently, but we're not going to get into that in this video. That's a little bit more of an advanced thing that I don't think you guys are going to need for just for 110 really. That being said, I think the next, and possibly, from a programmer's point of view, one of the most important um, uh, windows is our console window. All right. This is where whenever you're getting a bug, whenever something's not working the way you want, the first thing you want to check is your console window. You can see right here I have this little warning. Scene view rotation is fixed to identity when in 2D mode. This will be an error in future versions of Unity. Honestly, don't really know what that's complaining about. But I'm just going to clear it. Just had to look at that real quick. So your console is generally going to be screaming at you with errors when you have an issue. So let me real quick just open up my script. I got Visual Studio opening up real quick. and I'm just going to write a line of code that I know is going to throw in errors. So that's throw new exception. Or you know what? Here, we'll actually just make an actual error. So we're going to make a public transform object, and we're going to, let me zoom in a bit, try printing out object dot position, right? Super simple, right? And if I go to my camera, we'll see that there is a, oh, I guess I didn't keep this on my camera. We have a little, spot right here for object. Now, if I hit play, it's going to, in update, try and print that every frame. We see my errors are just racking up. And that's because that there's no, it says, hey, you probably need to assign the object variable of the MyScript script in the inspector. And if I click on it, it highlights main camera. And if I double click on it, it takes me to the line of code that, is acting a fool. Now, this is a pretty easy bug to fix, right? If I just drag square into here, I'll start. Ideally, should be, oh. So the console has a couple different things. It has this little message icon, this warning icon, and this error icon. I didn't have my messages open, so now it's printing, after I turn them on, it's printing out the messages that, I'm telling it to print out, the position of the object in the object section. Now, I have it set to collapse. If I uncollapse it, it's going to keep printing forever and ever and ever. So generally, I can't think of a really good reason off the top of my head to have it not collapsed. You'll generally want it collapsed. And if I move the square, let's just do this. You'll see that as the value changes, it no longer stays on the same line. It gives me a new line per new entry. So it only really collapses and repeats if it's printing out the same thing. Now, if I were to go back to main camera and take this out, we're just going to set it to none. You see, I immediately start getting errors again, right? Now, errors, you generally, if you have any, need to fix them. They break your code integrity as it's, out in the wild and on your like if you have a built game or if you're putting something on the App Store, a lot of the times, even an error like this, which isn't crashing my game in Unity or anything, will crash something on a actual platform. It'll just, your game will stop working. It'll close to desktop or crash on the phone. Even if your error isn't doing something in game directly, I could still move my camera around and do things. It is still a problem. You do still need to fix it. Warnings. So that's if I unhit play, do I get that one warning that we had? We had, if you rewind in the video just a bit, we had a warning here. Sometimes those are fine. They're simply, warning you that, hey, this isn't going to be, you can't use this in future versions of Unity, or hey, this is going to be a problem, or, simple things. But a lot of the time you want to minimize those as much as possible. Because they are still things that you should worry about and you shouldn't have in your code. I think in the C# lecture, that's going to be where I go into more on the console. However, that's pretty much all I'm going to get to with the console there. We then have our game window, okay? Our game window is where we actually see the game, right? So if I move my camera, you can see that it updates the view. It basically takes the view of your main camera and displays it in the game view. Big thing, unless you're purely editing, right? You never want to be in free aspect. Okay. Now, if you're just editing a scene view or you just want to have the biggest window you possibly can, then that's fine. But keep in mind, you want this to actually go on somebody's screen. So if you're building things in free aspect and they're screen elements like UI, you generally want to be in a 16:9 aspect until, and this is a caveat, until this changes, right? Generally, the most common screen size is a 4K screen or a 1920x1080, which are generally all 16:9 aspect ratios. If you go and do the math, 1920x1080 breaks down to 16:9 ratio, right? Um, and that's I'm not going to go too far into that, but generally you want to stay in a 16:9 aspect ratio, just so that way then as you add UI, as you add things, you can see what the player is actually going to see. Sometimes, let's see, let's go ahead and put that back on. Sometimes this low resolution aspect ratios will allow you to uncheck it. Right now, for some reason, it's not for me. Let's try play unfocused and let's see. Nope. Um, Sometimes it doesn't. You'll get like gray borders around the entire edge of your game window, which isn't ideal, right? That's not what we want. Um, Generally, then I just go to this low resolution aspect ratios, uncheck that, and you get basically what we're looking at here. The one other thing, I'm going to go ahead and take the script off of our camera just so that we don't get more errors because, we should not be having them. Um, the last thing that I'm really going to talk about when it comes to Unity in general here is this play focus section. I'm going to be honest with you, not 100% sure the difference between play focused and play unfocused, but I do know what play maximized means. If you go to play maximized and hit play, it's going to maximize your screen. Okay? Pretty simple, right? Gives you the most view that you can get. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, if you're working on, let me backtrack. If you're working on mobile, you might go to a simulator, and Unity is blessed us with all these different device types. But for right now, we are really just going to be sticking with this game view. And that's going to be a wrap for this video. Thanks, guys, for watching. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments or shoot me a message over Discord. Thank you.